Hey there, it's Kevin from Team Firstly. Today I have for you 5 essential do's and don'ts when it comes to program surveys. You might be wondering what kind of programs? Well, this includes mentorship, career development, startup acceleration, and even coaching. That being said, these principles will apply to any kind of program in which you need to survey your participants. Before diving in, I wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing at Firstly. Firstly is a software platform that helps program administrators build programs with measurable impact. With automation features, a step-by-step program builder, as well as impact measurement, we're building the tools that help program administrators succeed at their jobs and really uplifting the folks that they serve. With that, let's start with first understanding why this is so important. It's important to have quality program surveys because you need that information and data to constantly improve your program. It's helpful to collect information so that you know what's working and what's not with your participants. Additionally, it's really important to have good program surveys because the data will help you secure more funding when it comes to grants. By having better outcomes tracked, you'll be able to better articulate your impact, and then you'll be you'll have a more competitive and easier time securing these grants that you're applying for. Last but not least, as program administrators are often overworked, or at least from my experience, it's a really great way to socialize how your program has actually helped participants so that you can motivate your teams and align on this shared mission that you have. That being said, let's go ahead and dive into the 5 do's for program surveys. Number one, it's really important to make your questions clear and concise. You don't want it to be the case where you are asking a question that's vague, because that invites the participant or the user to answer in ways that aren't going to be helpful for your data collection. Instead of being broad in your surveys, you might want to ask a question that is pointed, such as, in what ways has your mentor helped you? If you asked a question that was more vague, such as how helpful was the program, you're going to get very mixed responses. And so you want to definitely plan out your intention for launching the survey and the question before you execute. Next, do use a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions. Now, here's the thing. When you use qualitative questions such as how has your mentor helped you, it gives you a lot of insightful information about how the program's going, and it's a starting point for you to do more research. If you have that kind of question and maybe someone didn't have a great experience, you can then follow up with them and have an interview chat or perhaps like a focus group so that you can get ideas on how to improve. On the flip side, though, you also have quantitative questions which are equally as important, but in different ways. When you're asking quantitative questions such as how confident do you feel about your career on a scale of 1 to 5, you can issue these questions and surveys before and after the program, and then actually measure the improvement upon those scales that are used. This is a great way to get information that you can share with your potential funders and donors so that you can really demonstrate with numbers how your program has helped. Let's move on to number 3. Do ensure anonymity and confidentiality. This is really important depending on the kinds of surveys you're issuing because you want your participants to answer as open and as honestly as possible. So many times participants, they might not share their rawest thoughts because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. They know that you, as the program administrator, you're going to be reviewing the feedback and they don't want to make you feel bad, especially if it's tied to their name. So if you make it anonymous and confidential, that is one way to invoke more honest responses that will actually help you drive your program forward. Number 4, do follow up with your participants. Again, it's really important to get to the meat of a user's experience in your program. And qualitative questions, for example, only paint one part of the story. you can use the questions as a way to identify who had a negative experience and then follow up with them to learn more and just ask more probing questions on how they can improve the program. This is also a way to make your participants feel heard and making sure that their opinion is respected. And so by actually following up with them to learn more, it shows that you care as a program administrator, and it's going to elicit more involvement from them down the road. Last but not least, number 5, do use a reliable and user-friendly platform. I've done so many surveys on Google Forms, and true, they do work, but it's not a very user-friendly experience. It can often feel really overwhelming, and especially if the survey just feels like an additional task on their program curriculum that they're already doing. It makes a person not want to complete the survey. So with that said, Firstly does offer surveying capabilities and a platform where you can build your program and have your surveys included in the curriculum all in one place. So it's an easier way for participants to understand what they're trying to do. And especially because when you launch on Firstly, you can actually invite your participants to join and then complete every assignment in one place. That being said, let's move on to the 5 don'ts. Starting with number 1. Don't make any assumptions in your questions. What I mean by this is sometimes folks can write survey questions that are a little bit biased or a little bit leading. And if you do that, you're essentially guiding your users to answer in one way or in another. And you don't want that because you want open and honest questions. So instead of asking something like, how was the meeting that you had with your mentor, you might want to ask something that leads up to that, such as, did you have any meetings with your mentor? Or what was the number of meetings you had with your mentor? Let's move on to number 2. Don't overload participants with too many questions. I often see this with organizations that are just starting out, and they think that it's best to just gather as much information as possible. That's a very spray and pray approach that doesn't work. And usually when I see that, it's because the program isn't sure of what outcomes or impact they want to measure yet. What I do recommend is getting really concise on perhaps the 3 or 5 things that you really care about in the program and connecting that with the participant outcomes, or rather the outcomes that you want them to have. That way you can ask pointed questions, perhaps around their level of career readiness or their level of sense of belonging. It really depends on the program, but just make sure the questions that you ask are tailored and curated based on the outcomes. Number 3, do not ignore the data. Oftentimes I see that, maybe you get a result from the survey that you don't want or you don't necessarily agree with. Those are actually the most beneficial survey results because you can use that to, again, dig in to the participant's experience and figure out what to fix. Don't assume that the person is answering a certain way just because they weren't engaged or some other factor. Instead, use that as a starting point for your research. Number 4, don't forget to share the results with the participants. If you're doing a program over, let's say a 3-month duration, that's a lot of work that the participants have to go through. And so it's really important for you to share the results and as well as share the wins, because it's a way that they can celebrate the completion of the program and just feel that sense of transparency that makes them want to re-engage with the program later on, perhaps as like a mentor or a volunteer. Last but not least, do not neglect accessibility. This is, really important depending on the population of participants you want to serve. And accessibility goes more than just the accessibility of screen readers, but this also goes into certain socioeconomic factors. One example that I can share for this is, as a first-gen and low-income graduate myself, I know that most students will have a phone of some sort, whereas there are far fewer students that will have a computer or a desktop. And so I encourage you to think about different modalities that make it more inclusive for your participants, such as using text messages as ways to secure feedback and outcomes data. Now, thanks so much for your time. But before jumping, once again, Firstly is a SaaS platform that helps program administrators build programs with measurable impact. If you have any questions about the content at all, or if you have any questions about Firstly or want to learn more, feel free to reach us at www.firstly.pro, or you can send me an email directly, which you can see that on the screen. So again, thanks so much for your time, and best of luck building programs with measurable impact.